The nut I showed up to return my ex-girlfriend's belongings. I thought it would take maybe 5 minutes. One uncomfortable exchange, one final goodbye, and then the strange, clean relief of being finished with each other forever. Instead, her roommate opened the apartment door barefoot, wearing an oversized gray sweater with smeared mascara beneath one eye and Lena's apartment key hanging loosely from her fingers. Then she looked at the box in my arms and quietly said, "She's gone." I stared at her. "What do you mean gone?" Mara Vale shifted to the side just enough for me to see inside the apartment behind her. Half the living room had already been emptied. The framed prints that used to cover the walls were missing. The narrow white bookshelf near the window had disappeared. Even the blue accent chair Lena once bought because she insisted it made the room feel European was gone too, which was funny because it had actually come from a discount furniture store in Queens and squeaked every single time someone sat in it. Lena had vanished from the apartment with the same quiet precision she used to disappear emotionally from our relationship. Mara watched my face carefully, not cruelly. "She moved out this morning," she said. I adjusted the cardboard box against my chest. "She knew I was coming tonight." "I know. She texted me yesterday." "I know. She said 7. Mara nodded once. "I know. Sometimes humiliation arrives slowly, like your mind gives your pride a few extra seconds to step outside before the damage settles in. This was one of those moments. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 32 years old and worked as a project manager for a restoration company in Brooklyn. For the last 3 weeks, I had been packing Lena's forgotten belongings into one cardboard box because, apparently, dignity after a breakup involves returning a curling iron, 2 sweaters, a cookbook she never opened, and a framed photograph from a wedding where we had already started lying through our smiles. Lena and I had been together for almost 2 years, long enough to develop routines, not long enough to survive honesty. The truth was actually simple. Lena loved being adored far more than she loved loving anyone back. I didn't recognize that immediately. At first, I convinced myself she was complicated, guarded, busy, ambitious. The kind of woman who carried herself with enough confidence and taste to make every room feel like somewhere I had to earn permission to exist. Then I started noticing smaller things. How often I apologized for problems I didn't create. How plans changed depending on her mood. How I regularly walked home from her apartment feeling like I had auditioned for the role of boyfriend and failed the callback. Mara had witnessed most of it, not directly. Never in the middle of our arguments or anything dramatic like that. She was Lena's roommate, not my friend, at least officially. But she was the person who opened the door when Lena forgot what time we were meeting. She was the person who handed me coffee once, after Lena abandoned our dinner plans to stay out drinking with coworkers. She was the one who quietly told me, "You don't have to wait in the hallway," like she was offering shelter from something larger than bad weather. Mara was nothing like Lena. Lena entered rooms expecting them to reorganize themselves around her. Mara entered quietly and noticed everything everyone else ignored. She worked overnight shifts as a hospice nurse, painted tiny watercolor birds on her days off, and spoke with a dry softness that somehow made even her sarcasm sound gentle. The first real conversation we ever had happened because Lena was 40 minutes late and ignoring her phone. Mara found me sitting on the front steps outside their building with flowers resting awkwardly across my lap like I was starring in a public service announcement about misplaced hope. "She's probably still out getting drinks," Mara said. I looked up at her. "That obvious? The flowers are starting to lose confidence." I laughed because I genuinely didn't know what else to do. She sat 2 steps higher than me, leaving a careful amount of distance between us. After a moment, she said, "For what it's worth, they're nice flowers. She likes peonies." "She says she likes peonies." I glanced up. Mara shrugged lightly. "She throws them away after 2 days because the petals fall. That should have taught me more than it did." As time passed, Mara slowly became someone I accidentally trusted, only in small ways. A quick conversation while Lena finished getting ready. A shared look after one of Lena's jokes landed a little too sharply. A quiet drive safe after another evening where I had swallowed more feelings than I spoke aloud. Nothing inappropriate ever happened. Not once. Honestly, that was part of what made it harder, because sometimes restraint creates more intimacy than betrayal ever could. Then Lena ended things with me in the middle of a restaurant. Not dramatically. She waited until after appetizers arrived, which somehow made the whole thing feel both cruel and financially strategic. Then she calmly explained that she needed a life that felt lighter. I asked her what that meant. She said, "You're wonderful, Daniel, but you want everything to matter." I remember staring across the table at her and suddenly realizing she genuinely believed that was a criticism. The following day, Mara texted me. Only one sentence. "I'm sorry, you deserved better than that." I looked at the message for a very long time. Then I deleted the conversation because keeping it felt dangerous. Now, 3 weeks later, I stood in Lena's doorway holding a box full of her belongings, while Mara looked like she hadn't slept. "What happened?" I asked. Mara leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "She got a sublet in Los Angeles." "Los Angeles?" "Apparently. She never mentioned Los Angeles. She never mentioned the movers either." I looked beyond her into the apartment again. The place didn't feel empty exactly. It felt wounded, like somebody had removed all the loudest pieces and left only the quiet behind. "Did she leave you with the lease?" Something shifted briefly in Mara's expression. Small enough that most people probably would have missed it. That was when I noticed the smudged mascara again. The oversized sweater. The apartment key was still clutched tightly in her hand. "She did," I said. Mara looked away. "It's handled." "That means it isn't. It means I'm currently pretending it is." I lowered the box onto the floor just inside the doorway. "Mara." She flinched slightly when I said her name. Not because I sounded angry, because I said it like I knew her. Maybe I did. Maybe that was the problem. "She told me to give you this," Mara said, extending an envelope toward me. I took it. My name was written across the front in Lena's clean, elegant handwriting. Inside was a short note, 3 sentences. "Daniel, I thought it would be kinder not to do another goodbye. Leave my things with Mara. I hope you find someone who wants the same kind of life you do." I read the note twice. Then I folded it carefully because ripping it apart would have looked too much like I still needed an audience. Mara watched me. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I looked at her then, and suddenly, the strangest thing about the entire night wasn't that Lena had disappeared. It was then that I felt less abandoned standing in front of the woman Lena had left behind. Mara folded her arms around herself. "You don't have to leave immediately," she said. The hallway suddenly felt narrower. "What?" She looked embarrassed now, like the invitation had escaped before she could stop it. "I mean, it's raining, and you carried that box all the way across town. And I made coffee because I didn't know what else to do with my hands." A faint, exhausted smile touched her mouth. "She's gone, Daniel." Then softer. "You can stay. I should have left. That would have been the smart decision." A man with any real sense would have placed the box inside the apartment, handed over the final ugly responsibilities of a dead relationship, and gone home to sit privately with his humiliation. Instead, I stood there holding Lena's note while Mara waited in the doorway, wearing that oversized gray sweater and looking like someone who had been abandoned so quietly. She was still deciding whether she was allowed to call it pain. Rain tapped against the fire escape outside. Somewhere upstairs, a television murmured faintly through the ceiling. I looked at the box near my feet. "She left you with the lease." Mara laughed softly. "You say that like repeating it makes it less ridiculous. Does it? No. How long? 3 months. I stared at her. "She moved across the country and left you with 3 months of rent. She covered part of next month. That's not generosity. That's evidence." Mara's mouth almost curved into a smile. Almost. Then she rubbed a hand across her face and stepped backward into the apartment. "Come inside before I regret offering coffee to my ex-roommate's ex-boyfriend in a hallway." That sentence absolutely should have made me leave. It didn't. I picked up the box and followed her inside. Without Lena's things, the apartment looked different. Smaller somehow. But not worse. The space near the window where the blue chair used to sit was empty. A pale rectangle marked the place where framed artwork had once hung. On the coffee table sat one mug, a folded lease agreement, a calculator, and a notepad filled with numbers written in Mara's neat handwriting. She noticed me looking. "Don't judge the math," she said. "It's been through a lot tonight. I'm judging the person responsible for the math." "That's fair." I set the box beside the wall. "Do you want me to move it somewhere else?" "No. I'll mail everything once she sends an address." "She didn't leave one? She left an email." Mara walked into the kitchen, very modern, very useless. I followed only as far as the doorway. The kitchen was tiny, lit by warm yellow light above the sink. A kettle steamed softly on the stove. Mara moved carefully, as if she kept her hands occupied long enough. The rest of her might not fall apart. I recognized that kind of movement. I had spent the last 3 weeks using it myself. She reached for another mug and paused. "Coffee?" "Yes. You don't have to say yes just because I offered." "I know. You can leave afterward too. I know that also." She looked at me then, and something shifted again. Not romantic, not yet. Something more dangerous because it was honest. 2 people abandoned by the same woman, standing together in the kitchen she left behind. Pretending coffee was a reasonable emotional response. Mara turned away first. She told me not to make a big deal out of it. Of course she did. She has a gift for that. I leaned against the counter. What exactly did she say? Mara poured coffee into both mugs. She said she needed a fresh start. The apartment had started feeling heavy. That she found a creative sublet in Silver Lake and didn't want to lose the opportunity. I laughed once without humor. Heavy, I repeated. Mara looked over at me. That's what she said about me too. Her expression softened in a way I hated needing. I know. She told you? No. Mara handed me my mug. I heard the argument when you came over after the restaurant. I stared down into the coffee. Of course, she had. The apartment walls were thin, and Lena had never cared who overheard pain as long as the pain wasn't hers. I'm sorry, I said. For what? For getting dumped loudly. For making you listen. Mara held my gaze. You didn't make anybody do anything. It was such a simple sentence, it still hit hard. I took a sip of coffee, mostly so I wouldn't have to respond immediately. It tasted strong and bitter, and significantly better than anything Lena ever made. Mara leaned back against the opposite counter. The kitchen was too small for two people, trying very hard not to acknowledge how aware they were of each other. You know what's embarrassing? She asked. What? I'm not even shocked she left. I'm embarrassed that I apparently didn't matter enough to deserve a real conversation. Her voice stayed calm, but her fingers tightened around the mug. I lived with her for a year. I covered rent twice while she was between jobs. I picked up her dry cleaning before interviews. I listened to endless speeches about needing distance from people who expected too much from her. She laughed quietly. Apparently, I was just furniture with a Venmo account. I shouldn't have smiled. But I did, only slightly. Mara noticed. What? Furniture with a Venmo account is objectively funny. It's tragic. It can be both. That finally earned a real smile, small, exhausted, but real. Then the smile faded, and I saw how close she actually was to falling apart. She left me the plants, Mara said. I glanced toward the living room. Several neglected plants still sat near the window, drooping dramatically in various stages of betrayal. Were they hers? Yes. Does she realize you work night shifts and forget to water anything that doesn't beep? Mara blinked. Then she laughed, not quietly this time. A genuine laugh that escaped before she could stop it. The sound changed the kitchen. It loosened something inside me, too. She covered her mouth with one hand, embarrassed, sorry. No, continue. The plants deserve accountability. They really do look abandoned. They're living metaphors. Don't say that. She shook her head. I'm not emotionally stable enough for plant symbolism tonight. We both laughed. For maybe 10 seconds, the entire miserable evening stopped feeling humiliating and started feeling absurd instead. Then the silence returned, but this time it wasn't as sharp. Mara lowered her eyes toward her mug. I shouldn't have told you to stay. I stopped smiling. Why not? Because it sounds wrong. Does it feel wrong? She didn't answer immediately. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Finally, she said, no, that single word settled quietly between us. Unprotected, honest. I slowly placed my mug on the counter. Mara, she looked up. I don't want this turning into some strange rebound grief triangle. Good, she said immediately. Because that sounds exhausting and poorly lit. I mean it, I know. Her voice softened. I didn't ask you to stay because I want something from you. Then why did you? Mara looked toward the half-empty living room. Because when she left, Mara said quietly, the apartment suddenly felt like proof that I had been easy to walk away from. Then her eyes lifted back to mine. And when you showed up in the hallway carrying that box, you looked like proof of the exact same thing. That hurt because it was true. She inhaled slowly. I didn't want either of us sitting alone tonight with her version of the story. I didn't have anything clever to say to that. So I gave her the only honest answer I could. Then I'll stay for one coffee. One coffee, she repeated. Then after a small pause, maybe two if the plant metaphors continue getting worse. The corner of her mouth curved slightly. We moved into the living room because the kitchen was too small for everything neither of us was saying. I sat on one end of the couch. Mara sat on the other with her knees pulled close and her mug cradled between both hands. The distance between us was careful, necessary, and somehow still more intimate than half the evenings I had spent in that apartment while Lena sat directly beside me. For a while, we talked about practical things, the lease, the landlord, whether she could realistically find another roommate quickly, whether I knew anyone emotionally stable enough to live with a hospice nurse who owned dying plants and brewed coffee, strong enough to violate medical guidelines. Then my phone buzzed. Lena. Of course. I looked down at the message. Did you drop off the box? Please don't make tonight complicated. I stared at the screen. Mara noticed my expression. Her? Without thinking, I handed her the phone. She read the message. Something in her face cooled. Then she passed the phone back. What are you going to say? She asked. I typed one sentence. I dropped it off. You made it complicated. Then I hit send. Mara looked at me. Oh, she said. I honestly didn't expect you to send that. Neither did I. Her eyes stayed on mine a second too long. Then her phone buzzed from the coffee table. She glanced down. Her face changed immediately. What? I asked. Mara turned the screen toward me. An email from Lena. Subject line, apartment. The preview read, Mara, I'm sorry this is sudden, but I need you to be flexible. I told Daniel he could stay there tonight if he needed closure, so please don't make it weird. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Mara looked at me. Her voice was very quiet. She planned this, and suddenly the apartment no longer felt abandoned. It felt arranged. Mara reread the email once, then again, as though staring long enough might somehow make the words less insulting. It didn't. I told Daniel he could stay there tonight if he needed closure, so please don't make it weird. There was something almost impressive about Lena's ability to leave an entire city while still controlling the emotional furniture from 3,000 miles away. Mara carefully set her phone down. That's why she told me not to pick up my shift tonight, she said. I frowned. What? She texted me earlier this afternoon. Said maybe I should call out because you were coming over and might need support. She laughed once without humor. She made it sound like she was worried about you. I stared at her. She told you to stay home. Mara nodded, and she told me to come here at 7, yes, and moved out before I arrived, yes. The room fell silent, not peaceful silence, ugly silence. The kind that arrives when two people realize they weren't only hurt by the same person. They were positioned. Mara stood abruptly and walked toward the window. Rain blurred the streetlights outside. Her reflection looked pale against the dark glass, swallowed by the half-empty apartment behind her. I feel stupid, she said. You're not. I stayed home because she said you might need somebody. She laughed again, but there was nothing amused about it. That's the part that actually got me. Not the lease. Not the money. You. I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet. Mara kept staring outside. She knew I'd care. That sentence landed differently because it wasn't only about manipulation. It was about being understood in the worst possible way. Lena had recognized Mara's kindness and used it like a key. I looked at the cardboard box on the floor. Her belongings, her note, her unfinished responsibilities were packed neatly together. Then I said, we shouldn't answer tonight. Mara turned around. What? No more texts. No more emails. No defending ourselves to the person who created the disaster, and then asked us not to make it inconvenient. Something in her expression softened slightly. That sounds surprisingly healthy. I'm experimenting. Dangerous. Extremely. Her phone buzzed again. We both looked at it. Another email. Mara ignored it. Good, I said. Then my own phone vibrated. Another message from Lena, Daniel. I'm asking you to be mature. Mara is sensitive, and I don't want her reading too much into you being there. I showed Mara. This time her expression didn't cool. It sharpened. She called me sensitive. I think she called both of us inconvenient. Mara walked back toward the couch and opened the lease paperwork spread across the coffee table. No more emotional responses tonight, she said. I sat up slightly. What are you doing? Something practical before I start screaming into the weather. She spread the lease, calculator, and printed emails across the table. For a moment, the exhausted nurse disappeared, and someone sharper took her place. She's still legally on the lease, Mara said. She can leave the apartment, but she cannot invent a graceful exit and hand me 3 months of rent. You want to call the landlord? Tomorrow, not tonight. She tapped the calculator. Tonight I want to know exactly what she owes. I shifted closer to the table while still leaving space between us. I'm good with contracts. She glanced at me. Restoration contracts, I clarified. Not emotional sabotage contracts, unfortunately. That nearly made her smile. Nearly. So we worked. At midnight, in my ex-girlfriend's half-empty apartment, I sat cross-legged on the floor beside the coffee table with the woman my ex had abandoned, calculating rent obligations, utility balances, furniture costs, and the exact financial value of Lena's talent for making people feel unreasonable for expecting ordinary decency. It should have felt ridiculous. It was ridiculous. But it also steadied us. Numbers gave the night structure. Emails became documentation instead of wounds. By 1 in the morning, Mara had assembled a complete list. Lease obligations, outstanding utilities, furniture Lena had taken despite splitting the cost, written evidence showing she knowingly left without proper notice. Mara looked down at the paperwork. I can handle this, she said. I know. She looked at me, tired, but clearer now. You didn't say alone. No, good. That single word moved through me quietly, not because it sounded flirtatious, because it sounded like trust. Then my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't Lena, it was my sister, Claire. You okay? Lena posted something weird. I opened Instagram before I could stop myself. Lena had uploaded a photograph from an airport lounge. Designer sunglasses, a wine glass, perfect lighting, caption. Sometimes choosing yourself means leaving behind people who confuse love with heaviness. New chapter, LA, be kind. I stared at it. Mara leaned slightly closer so she could read the screen. For a second, neither of us reacted. Then she whispered, wow, that one word carried enough exhaustion to fill the apartment. I closed the app. Mara pulled her knees closer. She's already turning it into a narrative, she said. Yes, and in her version, we're the problem. I looked at her. The apartment had gone quiet again. Rain, old pipes, the low hum of the refrigerator. The kind of silence where people either lie or finally stop trying. No, I said quietly. In her version, we're the people she left before we could ask for honesty. Mara's eyes lifted toward mine. That's not the same thing. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then something in her expression opened. Not completely, just enough for the truth underneath to show. I was in love with her once, she admitted. I went still. Mara immediately looked down. Not while you two were together. Before that. Briefly. Stupidly. She knew? I think she liked knowing. Her voice tightened. Then she brought you home, and I got over it slower than I should have. The room shifted again. Not jealousy. Something more complicated. Because suddenly every careful glance, every moment of distance, every act of kindness carried another layer beneath it. Mara looked miserable. I never told you because it wasn't yours to carry. I nodded slowly. Thank you, I said. She blinked. For what? For not turning your pain into my responsibility. Her eyes filled slightly, but she stayed steady. Then, very softly, she said, I think that's why I liked you before I admitted it to myself. The words settled between us. Quiet. Irreversible. Before I could answer, someone knocked on the door. Both of us froze. Another knock. Then a woman's voice echoed from the hallway. Mara, it's Mrs. Alvarez. The landlord just called me. He says Lena gave notice that you're leaving too. Mara's face drained of color. The night had somehow found another way to get worse. Mara opened the apartment door, still looking pale. Mrs. Alvarez stood outside wearing a quilted robe, silver hair pinned loosely back, her phone clutched in one hand and suspicion visible in both eyes. She lived across the hall and somehow learned everyone's business before the mail carrier did. What do you mean Lena gave notice? Mara asked. Mrs. Alvarez glanced past her and noticed me sitting on the floor surrounded by paperwork and Lena's abandoned box. Her eyebrows lifted. I stood too quickly. This isn't. I am much too old to care what this is, Mrs. Alvarez interrupted. I care about rent, locks, and people leaving mattresses beside the garbage bins. Mara blinked. Then, despite everything, I nearly laughed. Mrs. Alvarez stepped into the apartment without waiting to be invited. The landlord called because he couldn't reach you. Lena emailed him saying both tenants would be vacating by the end of the month. Mara's voice flattened. She what? She said you agreed. I absolutely did not agree. I know, Mrs. Alvarez looked around the apartment. You are many things, Mija. Quiet, exhausted, terrible with plants, but not stupid. Mara closed her eyes briefly. That tiny kindness hit her harder than an insult probably would have. I reached toward the lease papers. Do you have the landlord's number? Mrs. Alvarez looked at me. And you are? I hesitated. Mara answered before I could. He's Daniel. That was all she said, not Lena's ex-boyfriend. Not a problem to explain, just my name, Mrs. Alvarez studied me for another second before handing over the number. Daniel looks angry, she observed. I'm trying to stay constructive. Men always say that before sending dangerous emails. Mara smiled for real this time. Good. We needed one. The landlord answered on the third ring, already sounding defensive. His name was Paul, and within less than a minute, it became obvious that Lena had done exactly what Lena always did. Provide just enough information to make herself appear reasonable, while everyone else looked dramatic. She told me both tenants were leaving, Paul said. Mara stood beside me with her shoulders tight. I never said that. She copied you on the email. I was copied after she sent it. Well, I already scheduled a showing tomorrow afternoon. Mara went still. That was the moment I noticed her breathing change. Not panic, rage trying to remain polite. I held the phone out toward her. She took it. Paul, she said quietly. Her voice sharpened the entire room. I am legally on this lease. I have not submitted notice. I have not agreed to vacate this apartment. A pause. You do not have permission to show this unit tomorrow, and if anyone enters without proper notice or consent, I will document everything before breakfast. Mrs. Alvarez smiled proudly as she had just watched a niece win a spelling competition using a knife. Paul started stammering. Mara did not. She requested written communication records, asked for email confirmation, clarified that Lena remained financially responsible unless formally released from the lease. She said the phrase tenant rights with the calm precision of someone used to translating panic into instructions. By the time the call ended, the apartment felt different. Not fixed, not safe, but no longer surrendered. Mara handed the phone back to me. Her hand was trembling. I noticed immediately. She noticed me watching her war. Don't say anything kind, she warned. I was going to say that was terrifying. That's acceptable. Mrs. Alvarez nodded approvingly. Good girl. Mara looked like she might cry again, but she didn't. Instead, she said, I need to email him. I'll help, I said automatically, then corrected myself. If you want. She looked at me carefully. That distinction mattered. I want, she said. Mrs. Alvarez finally left after making Mara promise not to let anyone pressure her out of the apartment. At the door, she paused and looked at me. You don't seem like the type to make trouble worse. I'll try not to. She narrowed her eyes. That is not a promise. No, Mom. She appeared satisfied by the honesty and disappeared back across the hall. For the next hour, Mara and I drafted the cleanest email I had ever helped write. Dates, lease clauses, screenshots, Lena's notice, Mara's lack of consent, requests for written confirmation, no insults, even though several were deserved. When Mara finally hit send, she leaned back against the couch cushions and stared up at the ceiling. I should feel better. You stopped an illegal showing, documented the lie, and made your landlord nervous at 2 in the morning, I said. That's not nothing. It still feels like she keeps reaching into the room. I looked toward the box near the wall. Lena's sweaters, Lena's curling iron, Lena's note, Lena's talent for turning people into unfinished business. Then I stood, picked up the box, and carried it to the entryway. Mara straightened slightly. What are you doing? Moving her out of the center of the apartment. I set the box beside the front door. Nothing dramatic, just enough. When I turned back around, Mara was watching me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. What? I asked. She always made people orbit around her, Mara said softly. Yeah, you just moved the planet. I smiled faintly. Probably overdue. By then, the rain had softened outside. The apartment was still half empty, still full of unresolved problems. Still technically the place where my ex had engineered one final emotional disaster. But Mara no longer looked like someone abandoned. She looked like someone standing in the wreckage, deciding what still belonged to her. I checked the time. It's almost 3. You should go. The sentence came out automatically. We both heard it. Mara immediately looked down. I didn't mean that. I know. I mean, you can go. Obviously, you should sleep. You have an actual life that doesn't involve emergency lease warfare. My life is extremely flexible. That sounds fake. It is, I admitted. But I'm staying anyway if you want me to. Her eyes lifted again. There it was, that dangerous simplicity. Stay. She stood slowly. Daniel, I don't want to become the person you choose just because Lena hurt you. You're not. You don't know that yet. That was fair. Pain can make anything resemble shelter if the lighting is soft enough. So I didn't move closer. Instead, I said the only thing I knew was true. I felt more seen in one terrible night with you than I did in 2 years trying to be enough for her. Mara's lips parted slightly. I kept speaking before fear could edit me into something safer. And I know I don't want to treat that feeling carelessly. Her eyes filled again, not the same way as before. This looked less like hurt, more like fear of hope. Very quietly, she whispered, I liked you before tonight. The room went still. I tried not to, she continued. First, I had good reasons, then bad reasons, then no reasons except fear. I looked at her. Mara, if you kiss me tonight, she interrupted softly, voice trembling slightly. I need it not to be because she left. There it was, the line. Clear, necessary. I crossed the room slowly and stopped directly in front of her. Close enough to feel the question between us, not close enough to take the answer. Then I won't kiss you tonight, I said. Her face changed immediately. First surprise, then something softer, something deeper. I touched her hand once, briefly. Ask me tomorrow, I said. Mara looked down at our hands, then back at me. And for the first time all night, her smile carried no apology. Stay on the couch, she whispered. I nodded. 1 couch, 1 coffee in the morning. Maybe 2 if the plants look worse. They absolutely will. She laughed quietly, and somehow the sound made the apartment feel less abandoned. A few hours later, just before sunrise, I woke on the couch to the sound of Mara moving around in the kitchen. She stood near the window, wearing the same oversized gray sweater, reading something on her phone. Her face had gone cold. I sat up immediately. What happened? Without speaking, she turned the phone toward me. Another email from Lena. I need both of you to stop acting like victims. I did what was best for everyone. Mara looked at me. She wasn't crying anymore. She was finished. Tomorrow, she said quietly. We answer properly. Mara didn't respond to Lena immediately. That was the first real sign something inside her had shifted. The earlier version of the night would have answered instantly. Defended. Explained. Tried desperately to make Lena understand the damage she caused, as if understanding had ever been the missing ingredient. But instead, Mara simply placed her phone face down on the kitchen table, poured coffee into 2 mugs and said, I'm going to shower before I write something legally useful instead of spiritually satisfying. That sounds like growth. It feels like indigestion. By 9 in the morning, we had 3 things prepared. A formal email to the landlord confirming that Mara was not vacating the apartment. A second email to Lena outlining lease responsibilities. And a folder containing screenshots proving Lena had knowingly staged the entire handoff, misrepresented Mara's consent, and attempted to manage the narrative afterward. Mara sat at the kitchen table wearing clean jeans and a navy sweater. Her hair was still damp. The gray sweater was gone. So was the look of surrender that came with it. She reread the email to Lena one final time. It was perfect. No begging, no anger, no emotional courtroom disguised as communication, only facts. You remain responsible for your portion of the lease unless formally released. You did not have my consent to provide notice on my behalf. You did not have my consent to use my apartment as emotional closure for your breakup. Going forward, all communication regarding rent, utilities, or shared property should remain in writing. At the bottom, Mara added one final sentence. You left, Lena. Stop trying to manage the room you abandoned. Then she pressed send. For a moment, both of us simply stared at the screen. Nothing dramatic happened. No music. No cinematic revelation. The plants remained dead. But Mara exhaled like she had been holding her breath since yesterday afternoon. There, she said. I lifted my coffee mug slightly. To legally useful indigestion. She smiled. Then her phone started ringing. Lena. Mara watched the screen vibrate until the call finally stopped. A minute later, my own phone started ringing. Lena. I declined the call immediately. Mara looked at me. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I said quietly. I did. By noon, the landlord answered in an entirely different tone. No apartment showing, no vacating notice, no changes without direct written confirmation from Mara. He also confirmed that Lena remained financially responsible for the lease unless every party signed an official release. By 3 that afternoon, Lena sent a long email, then another, then one beginning with, I'm sorry you both misunderstood, which was honestly impressive in how terrible it was. Mara and I looked at each other and laughed at the exact same time. Not because it was funny, because some people managed to apologize while still gripping the knife. Mara didn't answer. That was the second sign. The third arrived that evening when Mrs. Alvarez knocked on the apartment door carrying a small container of soup, a packet of tenant rights flyers, and a cutting from one of her plants. This one is difficult to kill, she said while eyeing the dying plants near the window. For practice, Mara accepted the cutting carefully, like somebody handing over a sacred responsibility. After Mrs. Alvarez left, I looked at the plant and said, that thing has a lot of pressure on it. Mara raised an eyebrow. It knows what it signed up for. I stayed that night too. On the couch again. Nothing happened that shouldn't have. The next morning, Mara handed me coffee, leaned against the kitchen counter, and looked at me across the room. It's tomorrow, she said. I set my mug down slowly. So it is. You told me to ask you tomorrow. I remember. She walked around the table toward me. Not dramatic, not seductive. Just quietly brave in the way she had always been. If I ask you to kiss me, she said softly, it won't be because Lena left. I know. And it's not because the apartment feels empty. I know. And it's not because we both got hurt by the same person. I stepped closer. Then why? Her eyes stayed on mine. Because before any of this happened, I noticed the way you kept waiting for someone who never deserved your waiting. Her voice trembled slightly. And I wanted very badly to become the person who opened the door and told you to come inside. That was the sentence that ended the old version of my life. So I kissed her. Not like revenge. Not like rebound. Like two people who had spent too much time being careful around the wrong person and were finally learning how to be careful with each other. Things did not magically become simple afterward. Simple would have been dishonest. Mara still had a lease problem. I still carried bruises from a relationship that had hollowed me out more than I wanted to admit. And Lena still spent a while sending emails that sounded graceful until you reached the second paragraph. But the room changed. That mattered. Mara eventually found a new roommate through another nurse she trusted. Lena paid what she owed after Mara mentioned small claims court exactly once. The box containing Lena's belongings stayed beside the door for 9 days before she finally sent an address. And when I mailed it, I felt absolutely nothing dramatic. No cinematic closure. No emotional thunder. Just postage. Mara and I moved slowly. Real dates. Not emotional emergencies disguised as intimacy. Coffee after her overnight shifts. Walks through Brooklyn once the weather softened. Small restaurants where nobody knew Lena's name. One afternoon in the park, where Mara sketched a sparrow on a napkin and pretended it wasn't beautiful. 3 months later, she came to my apartment for the first time. She stood in the doorway holding takeout and said, your apartment is suspiciously clean for a man carrying this much emotional damage. I hired professionals, I told her. A therapist and a vacuum. She laughed, and I remember realizing then that I wanted that sound in every room I ever lived in. A year later, we moved into a different apartment together, not hers. Not mine, ours. No ghosts tucked into the corners, no abandoned furniture, no dying plants except the cutting Mrs. Alvarez gave Mara, which somehow survived and became smug about it. 2 years later, Lena emailed me one final time, no apology. Just a polished message explaining that Los Angeles had taught her a great deal about herself and that she hoped we were both doing well. I showed Mara. She read it carefully, handed the phone back, and simply said, good for Los Angeles. Then she watered the plant. That was the moment the final door closed. 3 years after the night I showed up carrying a cardboard box, I proposed to Mara in our kitchen while she painted a tiny watercolor bird at the table. I had planned a much better speech. naturally. But she looked up at me with blue paint on her wrist, tired eyes, and that soft, dry smile that had rescued me before I even realized I needed saving. So instead, I simply said, "Stay." She stared at me for a second. Then she noticed the ring. Her eyes filled immediately. "You know," she whispered, "that word has caused us a surprising amount of trouble." It also worked. She laughed through tears, then said yes. Years later, when people asked how we met, Mara usually answered, "He dated my roommate," and I would add, briefly, "Unfortunately." Then Mara would smile and say, "He came over to return a box," and every single time I would remember the half-empty apartment, the rain against the fire escape, the coffee, the exhausted woman in the oversized gray sweater who opened the door and quietly told me the truth. "She's gone, then you can stay." The truth is, I arrived there to return my ex-girlfriend's things. But what I really returned was the version of myself that kept standing outside doors where I was never fully wanted. Mara opened one. And this time I stayed. What would you have done if you went to return your ex's belongings and discovered they had left behind one final emotional disaster? And have you ever realized the person quietly noticing your pain was the person you should have been seeing all along? Tell me your story in the comments. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.